Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to tackle the trendy technique of stitching using stamps you already have. I'm using an older set. This is Apple of My Eye from Stampin' Up, but you can use whatever you like. And I will be using some basic supplies like embroidery floss. I was organizing my floss the other day and I thought I would really like to use that in some cards. So here we go. I organize it on little bits of cardboard or cardboard bobbins, and then I put them in a fish and tackle box so by color so they're easy to find and put back when I'm done. I also organize my ink cubes kind of similarly. I use a clear acrylic box frame, and that way I can put all of my inks there in a layer or two, and I can stack them up on top of other box frames in my drawers so that I can always get to them, and it saves a lot of space. And then I can just take the whole tray to my table when it's time to stamp. So it's space saving and really convenient too. So consider that if you need some storage for little things like that. I am using a few different acrylic stamp blocks that are really grimy, so if you have any tips on how to clean them, please let me know in the comments below because they all really need a good clean. And I will put a couple on each block when I'm stamping to save space on my table and to have everything out and ready to go. I die cut these mats for some white cardstock using an old Spellbinders die, and I'm just going to stamp my focal point on them, and this is the panel we're going to be stitching on. So for the orange slice, I'm stamping it or inking it up in a mid yellow color and then doing the edges in an orange, and that's called the rock and roll technique. It is a Stampin' Up technique actually, but I really like it and I've used it time and time again. That was one of the first things I learned actually way back in the day. And I probably should have offset this because I realized I wanted to use a large leaf and it's not going to fit, but then again I think letting an image cascade off the edge of a die cut looks kind of cool too. So you can do whatever you like best. You can plan ahead a little bit better when you make yours because you've seen the error of my ways, although I don't think it's an error. It's a creative choice. There are no mistakes, only creative choices. I also stamped up this leaf in 2 different shades of green so that I could get that lovely two-tone effect, which I think just looks like you spent way more work on it than you did, way more time, and I love projects like that. Just looks like summer to me. I think it's so nice and fresh. Now while I'm at it, I'm going to work on the background, and here's a tip. Store all of your like-minded stamps, your similar themed stamps together. Like keep all your fruit together, or all your mason jars together, or all your antique typewriters together, so when you go to do a card, you will have everything you need and other things that might go with it, so you don't end up having stamps forgotten about or going to waste. So I had this cute little orange slice stamp from Michael, I believe. It was just in the dollar bin and I couldn't resist it, and I thought this would be really fun for a background. And this cute little half a slice came from a jelly bean soup stamp set that I had to have because I had a mason jar on it, and this just tells you how deep into the stamping sickness I am that I have to have every mason jar I come across. It's insane. It's just insane. But at least I'm using the stamp set, so I'm feeling a little bit better because I've noticed that hoarding things does not make you feel good, but using them does. So there's a little public service announcement for you. Use your stuff and you'll feel better. I am dusting on some pink ink onto this background, and I'm just moving over a scrap of paper so I don't get it all over my mat and then get it all over me and get it all over my sweater and all over the back of my card. And the reason I'm doing this is because when you have bright colors on a white background, it can look really, it can be difficult to work with. It can just look kind of plain. So if you have pattern paper that's like that, that's just not doing it for you, try inking it. Try adding some ink, because once you compress that the difference between the brightest and the lowest colors, it really makes it more palatable. So kind of keep that in mind when you're doing a background, because you want those backgrounds to go to the background. So by reducing your contrast, it helps. That's a little artsy-fartsy thing for you there. The other focal point on my other card is going to be cherries, and I just love this theme. I think it's so cute. I love to see crimson red cherries next to teal. It's like a 1950s kitchen type motif. I think it's so classic. And also, when you have stamps, you can always change up your colors. So if there's, if you always used a stamp set with a certain set of colors, and now it feels dated, try it with different colors. Oh, and here's a teachable moment. When you're stamping, make sure, and you're using multiple stamps on one block, make sure that you have them on the other side so you don't end up accidentally stamp a cherry when you're trying to stamp a cherry stems. But that's all right. I'll just make sure there's a little cherry popping off the edge of the page there so that so it looks like it works and it wasn't a total accident. That happens a lot. Teachable moments are good though, I think, right? You guys always say you like those teachable moments. There's no perfection here. There's artistic choices. So of course you have to stamp the stems first with these cherries, otherwise it'd be really hard to line them up. And then you can stamp the cherries and the leaves afterwards. Doesn't really matter what order you do those in, but you got to do the stems first. And now I am brushing in some beautiful teal ink because I just love that color combination. I think that crimson red and aqua or teal is just one of my favorite combinations. Now the fun part, we are going to do the stitching. This is what you came for, right? You want to see how to do this. And the first technique we're going to poke holes for is for back stitching. So luckily this image has little divisions on it, those little divisions of the orange slices. So I'm going to start off by poking a hole at each of those division lines. So the key for stitching, especially if you don't have a die and you're doing it by hand, is to evenly space your stitches. And the best way is to find a way you can divide up your space. So now that I've got that divided up, I want to have 2 stitches in between those each two that I've poked already. So that's easy. I can eyeball 2 stitches in between. Even if they're not absolutely perfect, it's going to be close enough by the time we get our thread in. So try to break it down so that you can divide your space up evenly, and then you're going to have a much easier time. If you're doing a straight line, obviously you could use a ruler to help you out, but I find if you could just find some guideposts in the stamp to help you divide up your stitches, you're going to be in good shape. Now on the cherries, we're going to do a different type of stitch. We're going to do a satin stitch, which is when you have longer threads laying next to each other. So the only thing to remember here is that you need to have your stitches in groups of 2. So I'm doing 2 next to each other on the top, then 2, 1 on each side. As I work down, I'm just making sure I have a pair of stitches every time I poke them in. And these stitches can be closer together. With the orange, where we were going to chain stitch, we can't have our stitches too close together or they'll tear through. With a satin stitch, we don't have to worry so much because there's a longer distance pulling those 2 stitches together. If we were going around the edges of the cherry with stitches that close together, they'd probably pull through, but since we're going to go across them, we'll be fine. Now if you have a hard time threading your needle, you can use a needle threader. This one here is meant more for yarn or larger needles, so that really is going to be too big for the needles we're going to use for paper embroidery, but you can use a regular sewing needle threader if you need to. Keep in mind that the sewing needle threaders are more delicate and embroidery floss does kind of break them more often, so just kind of keep that in mind. They're not expensive, but it's there if you need that help. And what you're going to do here for a satin stitch is you are going to come in from the back and hold the tail of the string, and then you're going to go into the hole in the front that's next to it. So now for the second one down, I'm starting on one side of the cherry, I'm going in from the back, I'm going to go across the front of the cherry and go in on the other side so that stitch lays down parallel to the first stitch that I did. Now I'm going to go to the next stitch. Now notice I'm going from one side to the other. I'm not making long stitches in the back, and that's to conserve my thread so that I can do both of these cherries with that about 1.5 piece of thread that I have on there. So on the back of our card, it's going to look like a circle where I've stitched, and on the front we're going to have all those lines lying next to each other. Now if you're doing a satin stitch on cloth, you would have your stitches much closer together, and it would look kind of like a satin fabric. That's how it gets the name, all those stitches lying flat next to each other. But because this is paper, I can't have my holes that close together or they'll rip, so we are going to see some of the stamping underneath. So that's why I matched my thread to the color of the ink, so that we're going to get that lovely texture, and it won't be so noticeable that we're not having a packed applique satin stitch there. I hope that makes sense. So you do have those limitations with paper. It's going to tear, rather than fabric where the fabric will move, and when you put a needle through it, kind of pushes the threads away rather than tearing them like it would on paper. Hopefully that makes sense. I probably over-explained it. Oh, look, you can see the mistake I stamped on the back. No secrets for you guys, huh? That's how we roll around here. And then I'm just going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm just working bottom to top because that's where the next closest hole is, and I like to conserve the thread because I hate threading needles. I don't like to have to stop and thread my needles if I don't have to. One of the nice things about stitching on paper is that you generally don't have to knot off the threads on the back if you're using embroidery floss, especially in the center of an image like this. You can pretty much just trim it and leave it be. It's not going to pull through. I would leave maybe like an inch of a tail just so it can't pull through, but any adhesive you put on to attach it to the card should take care of it. And we'll be using foam squares on the back of those panels. Now to do a back stitch, this gives you the look of a continuous run of stitches. You're going to start in on the back as before, and you're just going to hold that tail end so it doesn't pull through. Now when I'm stitching, I should have mentioned this before, I only leave about a 2 inches or so of working tail. I don't double it up like I would if I was like, you know, mending a hole in some clothing. You just want to have enough so that it won't pull through your needle. So what you do is you go in from the back. See that? I'm going a stitch away from where I've just stitched, and then I'm putting it back in through the hole I just came out of. So you stitch backwards essentially. So that's why they call it a back stitch. So when from the back, I'm going into the next stitch, and then from the front, I'm stitching back into the one I just came out of. So you just kind of overdo your stitch each time. You can rewind this if you need to, or watch it back in slow motion until you get it. Once you put needle to paper, you are going to see how this works. And of course, you can use the same technique to do a design on clothing. If you want to do some clothing embroidery, that would be super cute to do, like some little fruits on some jeans or something. Oh my gosh, that'd be adorable. Now you do want to have your stitches fairly close together, but not so close they pull apart. These are about, I'd say 3/16 of an inch close together. The longer you go, the more angular it will be. So if you had a straight area to do, you wouldn't have to have as many stitches. But I try to keep them uniform because it just looks a little bit nicer when you have uniform stitching. And the back of this will look about the same as the front, and you're going to need about 3 times the length of what you're trying to stitch to complete a back stitch and not have to reload. So if I went around that circle 3 times with the string, that would be about the right length. And now that I've got that done, I can look at it. I think it looks really cute, and I want to go ahead, figure out where I'm going to place it, and then stamp a sentiment down. Usually, if I am stamping over a pattern like this, I will use my VersaFine Onyx Black ink because it's the blackest ink I have, but this dye-based black ink worked just fine. I'm stamping thank you on the outside, and then you're just the sweetest on the inside, and I love stamp sets that have an innie and an outie because that way it takes up some of the real estate and I don't have to think of something awesome to say on the inside of a card, because I can never think of what to say on the inside of a card. I can talk your ear off in person, but when I have to say something in a card and write it down, I just draw a blank. So I'm very thankful for stamp sets like that. And then I'll try to remember that I have that stamp so I can use it with other stamps. I'll probably forget, but that would go with a lot of stamps that I have. I also found this really great ribbon. I've had it in my stash forever. The citrus slices is from American Crafts. I have no idea who the black and white polka dot's from, but it's pretty classic, and I bet you could find it at any craft store. I am adding a little yellow to the back of the focal element from the cherry card because it looked a little too sparse, and then I thought I would stamp in some of these mini cherries that I had from a cheapo Michael's dollar bin set that I got a few years ago. Since the cherries are small and I wanted to have multiple colors, I'm going to use water-based markers to color them. These are from a Hoo-Hoo. They're pretty much the same as the Tombos, but they are a little smaller, but they're way cheaper. So the Tombos are about $3 each, and they are wonderful markers. But these are $20 for a set of 60. So if you don't have any and you're on a budget, I would highly recommend these. They've worked really well for me. But I do love the Tombos. There's so many good brands. Don't just go buy them because you want to buy them if you already have Tombos or Mementos or something else that it's virtually the same. So save you some money or keep you from spending money. I don't know. Use what you have. You know the deal. So the only thing to remember when you do this technique is to breathe on the stamp before you stamp it down to re-moisten the ink, because sometimes it takes some time to color from the first element to the last, and your ink can dry on you. I am just going to wrap some ribbon around the front panel of these cards. As you remember, I stamped right on the card itself, so I just wrapped this around that front card flap, and I'm just tying the satin ribbon in a bow. Satin ribbon is really easy to work with, so you just got to tie it in a bow and then flip. If it's a pattern ribbon, flip it around so that the good side is showing on the bow part. So that's pretty easy. I'm notching the ends, and if you're worried about it fraying, you can add some fray check, but quite frankly, I'm not going to bother with it. I think it'll be fine unless you think your card's going to have a rough journey to its recipient. I think you'll be fine not to use fray check. And there you have it. I decided to slide that bow up because after I was figuring out my placement, I realized it would look better at the top, kind of framing the edge opposite of the thank you. And there's that card. I really like that one. That's my favorite, actually, out of these two. Now, I wanted to use ribbon on this one in a similar fashion, but the ribbon didn't stand out on the background very well, so I'm going to make a contrasting stripe for it to rest upon. And to do that, I'm simply using a couple pieces of masking tape that I stuck to my sweater to de-stickify them a bit, and I am just rubbing an ink cube over it. And that way, it's going to give me a darker area to put the ribbon on top of, and it's going to match because I have used that pink ink to dust on the background. So just keep reusing the same colors, and you don't have to worry about having anything clash because you've already used it. It's already going to match. And I'm just going to tie that in a simple knot down towards the bottom so I can cluster that with the thank you. And I think when you cluster your elements and have them overlap, it just looks a little classier. Now this was looking a little plain to me. I do love the stitching element, but still it felt like it needed more. So I'm using some enamel dots just to embellish it a little bit. You can make your own enamel dots just by embossing some paper, and I do have a video on that on my YouTube channel, and I'll try to remember to link it in an iCard, but if I don't, just search DIY enamel dots on my channel and you'll find it, and I think that finishes it off really nice. The ones that I did use were store-bought for Waffle Flower if you're looking for those in particular ones. I decided that the sentiment on the front looked a little weak, so I simply took a blue Ohuhu marker, about the same color as the teal that I used to brush on around the orange, and just thicken the lines. And I think that really helped it pop, and there, I think they're super cute. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you give some of these techniques a try using the supplies you have at home. Please give me a thumbs up before you go. I really had a lot of fun making this, and I hope you do too, because you can make all your supplies new again if you just look at them with fresh eyes. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.